right, everybody, please welcome Maria, Rui, and Janine, and I'll let Maria take it from there. Everybody give them a round of applause, please.
Good morning, everyone. This panel doesn't need much introduction, but we're going to talk about data security and blockchain. And I'm Maria Karaivanova. I'm an investor with Madrona Ventures. My background prior to that is basically in security. And I was at a company in the Bay Area called Cloudflare for 5 years. It's a web security company. So it's an area near and dear to my heart. I'm super excited to be here with Rui and Janine. And why don't we start with quick introductions? Is that me?
Hi, everybody. I'm Janine. I'm thrilled to be here today. My background, just very briefly, is I actually got into technology several years ago in the mid-1990s because my son was born with a blood disorder that they told me was fatal, and I found out through the web that they had misdiagnosed him. So then I did what any normal person would do. I started a company, which was a web applications company, which I sold in 2004. And in 1999, we started Topia, really focusing on what we saw as the inefficiencies of the World Wide Web and how we might address those. But to be honest with you, I am more excited than I ever have been in the history of my career about blockchain, because I think that this is the technology that really is going to put the data back into the hands of the people. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
My name is Rui Maximo. So I started my career about 25 years ago. I was doing my master's in math, and I was watching this movie called Sneakers. I don't know if any of you saw that, but that's where I fell in love. I fell in love with crypto, and so I did my thesis in breaking RSA codes, and then I got recruited by Microsoft, and that's how I landed here in the Northwest, and I've been here ever since. So I worked in Windows security, and then I worked on the very first smartphone doing security for them. And then I did a hiatus, and I went to communications. So I worked on Skype for Business, wrote 6 books, and then of course, with my background, I got pulled back into security, and in terms of looking at how to secure these endpoints for communication. And then I left Microsoft, and I worked at Intellectual Ventures for 5 years, doing long-term thinking for Edward Young, who's the CTO of Intellectual Ventures. And then I worked in the Bay Area for a couple of years for RSA and Greenplum. And then I started my own company doing security products for Skype for Business and Exchange. So what I was basically doing is I was reverse engineering the network protocols that was SIP and UCWA, as well as EWS, and then finding out where the authentications were happening and how to block and sanitize the traffic. So if you think of the Matrix, looking at all the numbers, that was basically what I was doing, which is kind of fun. And then I was doing some contract work at Liberty Mutual, and they were looking for some crypto people who were developers, and they needed to read the Satoshi white paper. So I hadn't read that paper almost 2.5 years ago. So I decided to read it, and I fell in love with that because, again, it was crypto. So why not why not do that? It was just a natural marriage there for me. And so I started writing smart contracts on Ethereum, and I've been doing that ever since for a while.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So there isn't a day that goes by without yet another breach being disclosed. Anything from Yahoo and eBay and Target and Equifax, like all of us have been affected by those. Janine, how should we think about the ramification of those breaches for companies and individuals, especially in the era of blockchain?
Yeah, great question. And this is why we're so excited about blockchain, which is really the decentralization. All the breaches that we're seeing now are primarily resulting from this central authority or a central repository. And when we look at it as a data security company, we're seeing that if we can decentralize this and move the data more efficiently and more securely without having a target out there for the bad guys, we see that as a huge opportunity to elevate security. And it's a real issue. I mean, when you have an Equifax breach that resulted from, ooh, I forgot to do a patch, that's not a good place for anybody to be in when our data went to Equifax, not even under our control, and now it's completely out of our control. So I think that blockchain has a dramatic way of affecting that.
Yeah, I was going to add, so there's 2 camps, right? There's those who are protecting the data and those who are trying to attack. And the deck is stacked against those who are protecting the data, of course. Because, for example, Los Alamos National Laboratory, they get 10,000 hit attacks per day. It's incredible. And so they're having, for example, this is not unique to them, of course. A lot of banks and organizations have the same problem. And so any single entry point, which is the weakest link, becomes a path into the network and being able to attack. So that's all that a hacker has to do, whereas for the person that's protecting the data, they have to protect everything.
So on this note, Rui, then, does this mean that with blockchain, we don't need any data security or privacy? We don't need to worry about it?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need any protection. Yeah, I think we're done. No, unfortunately, that's not the case, right? So blockchain offers some great benefits, but security is not entirely covered there, right? So, for example, one of the things that people still have to do, and actually the onus becomes more important on the user, is that they have to protect their private key. So when they create a wallet, the onus is on the user to protect that private key. If they lose it, they're SOL, right? They just don't have any recourse there. So the responsibility falls back on the user, which I think in this day and age, people they've grown up with technology. They understand that concept, so it's easy enough for them to do that. But data security is certainly one of those that isn't addressed because anything that's on the blockchain is public, right? So when you write a smart contract, for example, any data that passes through or any state changes that happens, that's on the blockchain. That's on the ledger. Everybody can read that. Anybody who has technical expertise can understand what's going on. So you can't encrypt anything on the blockchain because that's open.
Can I add to that, if I may? And I think the other thing, we talked earlier about blockchain adoption, especially with the enterprise. And when you talk about business process, let's just take healthcare for an example. We think blockchain will have a huge impact on healthcare. It's right now run pretty much by the likes of Epic, where they have this, the data is tracked sort of adjacently to the patient, and blockchain really has the opportunity to put the patient at the center. But it is not practical, nor is it a good idea to put your entire medical record on the blockchain. So there has to be this negotiation between what should be on the blockchain and what should be off-chain, and some way to correlate the two. So that data layer, that data security layer, is much needed for blockchain adoption.
Yeah, if I'd like to add on that is, so the blockchain, one of the things it's really good for is state change, right? Tracking state change because it's immutable. So once you've tracked that change, then it's there. People can trust on that state because it's on the blockchain. Now, the data itself shouldn't really be stored on the blockchain because it's just too large. It would be way too expensive, as Janines states there. So that's a good point. But where do you store that data then, right? So you have to put it on somewhere else, like IPFS or some other solution that's available. And hopefully that solution is also encrypted and stored and in a secure way so that anybody that would try to access it wouldn't be able to decrypt it in any shape and form. And then the state can be stored there. So that's really the best usage for the data that you're trying to keep immutable, if you will.
Can I add one more thing? Please. I totally agree. I think that, when we talk about storage of data, that's completely different than sharing data with specified recipients. So key management and the ability to have some data security layer manage that. I think Peter mentioned earlier, if you take Facebook and try to put that into terms of a controlled, known network of friends, that's more difficult than just storing your data where you're able to encrypt it on your side and then put it out there. But it's that, sending it to a specified recipient and having all that key management happen, that's the tough part.
So let's talk about a couple of more vulnerabilities that you guys see. So that's one aspect, the storage. What else? What about the wallets and both the vulnerabilities, and what can we do and what are companies doing to protect themselves?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in terms of security, there's all the aspects, right? So we can start with the endpoints. So that would be your devices, your laptops. The old types of security issues still exist, right? So phishing attacks, that's still very predominant. And if they can steal your private key from that in that way, then your wallet is gone essentially, because they can just steal all your money, all your bitcoins.
And so what should you do?
Well, you have to use the same precautions as you would naturally for any old school type of security, right? So antivirus, you don't go to any sites you shouldn't be going to. Hopefully, if you can afford, just keep your wallet on a separate device. Your iOS device is probably more secure than your desktop. So that's something to keep in mind. Using a hardware wallet to store your money, your cryptocurrency, that's the best option there. If you can't afford, like a ledger, for example, or putting it offline in a cold storage, essentially. So talking about that's the wallet piece, that's the endpoint. So being careful about phishing attacks, that's a really big one, right? We're the weakest link, really. That's what it is. So when I've consulted for large companies or worked at large companies, the first thing they do is they're going to send you some phishing attacks just to see how vulnerable you are. And then if you click on that stupid link in that email, it's like, oh, dang it, I shouldn't have done it. I knew it. And I still fall prey for that. So that's one aspect. So the endpoints is one. The wallet is another aspect. The data that you have, so any communication that you have, so that needs to be encrypted, right? So through SSL, you just want to make sure that you're doing that piece there. The network needs to be secure. The servers that you're connecting to, those need to be secure too. So and then if you're doing anything on the blockchain with smart contracts, then those smart contracts need to be really well audited and vetted. Because if they're transiting crypto, you don't want that money to be lost.
And I think too that the hope and promise of decentralization is actually a new frontier for the bad guys. And SSL, while that worked great in the world of the wide world of the web, in a decentralized environment there is no central authority, so SSL is not going to cut it. So there's some new challenges that need to be overcome, and the DApp developers really need to consider data security upfront. So that, and to your point, code integrity is huge, but you also need to design that so that you're addressing that data security.
Sorry, if I could add. So really good point about the SSL, because SSL requires certificates, right, which comes from a certificate authority. So then again, we're going back to the old world of centralization. So what's the solution there for decentralizing everything? Now, the key point about decentralization that's important to keep in mind is with these big hacks that we see, whether it's Facebook or any of the credit reporting systems, is that they aggregate a ton of our data, right? So it's all of our data. We don't have control over it. We have no say in terms of how that is. Now, by decentralizing it, that means that each one of us carries and holds onto our own data. So from a hacker perspective, it's difficult. Now, I don't have just one target to attack. I have everybody's target I have to attack. And I'm only going to get a little bit. The payoff for those hackers becomes smaller. And so that's a way to help de-incentivize hackers.
Let's just for a minute talk about the exchanges and how do you think, in addition to your wallet and your personal edge devices, et cetera, what about the exchanges? What are they doing? What should they be doing? What have you seen happen there? That sounds like a pretty centralized point to hit if I'm a hacker.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it right on the dot there, right? So we go from a decentralized world to now centralizing through these exchanges, and that becomes a big target. And we've seen that happen over and over again. So that is an issue. That I don't really have an answer for, but there is a great panel happening at 3:00 that will cover that topic.
Pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I'm going to say the big R word here, but regulation relative to the exchanges and their activity is probably required. And this industry does not, have we're not unique to fraud. We had Theranos and Enron, and in the traditional world of capital formation, but this needs to be about, the AML, KYC. Those are the points that need to be encouraged through the exchanges, I think, would be my recommendation.
Well, switching gears a little bit back to what Rui was talking about before I asked about the exchanges, let's talk about this. I can go with a buzzword, which is self-sovereign identity, and we talked about the human tokens in the prior speaker. So what is it and how does it fit in this security data and privacy aspect.
Sure. So going back to what John was saying about the shopper, all of us as consumers, we want to be able to have control over it. We've seen how Facebook and Amazon are monetizing our own data and making boatloads of money off of us. And like, wait a second, we want a piece of that pie too, right? So decentralized or self-sovereign identity is one step towards that. So that means that we own our own identity. And by owning our own identity, that's not controlled by Facebook or Amazon, because if we decide to leave Facebook, well, we can't take our identity with us. We can't take all of our data with us. So that's a problem. So with that, identity, self-sovereign identity is a starting point for that, because once you have your identity on the blockchain, and the blockchain is a perfect approach for it because it's decentralized. Nobody owns it, yet everybody's participating in it. So nobody can, once you put your identity on the blockchain, nobody can take it away from you. So it's yours. You can keep it. And once you start with the identity, then you can hold on to your data, and then you can decide how you want to share that and how you want to monetize that, of course. So self-sovereign identity, in a nutshell, is you own your identity. It's on the blockchain. Blockchain is a great tool for doing it because nobody owns it, and you can control who has access to it.
And have you seen any companies working in that space that you think are going to win it?
It's funny you ask, because I did work for LifeID, and we were working on that particular problem exactly. I wrote all the smart contracts for it, which was a really fun experience. Very challenging because there was a lot of different technical challenges that had to come to play that I had to help solve. And they have a really great team, so they're really addressing that piece. But I think as Jonathan was saying, or someone else I can't remember earlier, Seattle is a hotbed for identity right now. So there's several other startups that's also working in that space as well. So it'd be interesting to see what transpires from it.
So Facebook is, since we're talking about Facebook, it's a good example of a company that actually knows their customers. So in addition to owning your data, they also know exactly who you are. And one of the biggest, I think, barriers to adoption of some of those blockchain technologies is this concept of, it's going to be used for terrorist activities or some illegal activities. And, that leads me to kind of, I'd love your thoughts on what are companies doing in this KYC space or know your customer. What are some of the things they should be doing, and what have you seen as best practice?
Well, I think a lot of the ICO platforms now incorporate AML KYC, and there's other companies, a couple that come to mind, Internet Identity. There's law firms specializing in evaluating to make sure that the investors are accredited if it's being offered as a security. And I think so you kind of have this, when you're selling your tokens in the pre-sale sort of mode, and then when you're in the actual ICO itself, where you're going to these exchanges, it kind of comes back to making sure that you're working with the right partners in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem is that everybody's having to do KYC and AML, right? And so some have rolled their own. I've been part of a team that's done that. Others will partner with other companies that will do it. New Alchemy is an example of that. So there's both ways. I think there'll be some kind of consolidation that happens. There's no reason for all of us to be, rolling our own. Just like, why should we make our own electricity? We don't do that, right? So why should we be creating our own KYC, AML? There's no reason to do that. So the cost is still fairly high, but I think it's dropping with the competition as that becomes a known quantity. Everybody will just outsource that piece to it. It is a requirement that needs to happen, but I think what we're seeing is, at least in my opinion, is a trend where, sure, 2017 was hot for ICOs. 2018 still is, but it's not taking the presses more. I think the next phase is, at least in my opinion, is going to be STOs, security tokens. And that will also, that would definitely be a security, and so they'll have to comply with the regulations. And so, again, KYC, ML, that will be a big hot topic for it. And yeah, that's it.
So I want to leave probably 1 minute for a question from the audience. But our next speaker, as you know, is Derek Kilmer, member of the United States Congress. Do you have, if any, advice in terms of, for him about legislation or regulation for the blockchain space that you'd like him to hear?
Well, I think he's a great candidate to have here today. Congressman Kilmer has been very active. The House now has a blockchain committee, and I think Derek recently joined that. And also, I know that he's very much in favor and supportive of innovation. And I think the one thing related to regulation, at least legislating this type of thing, is that we can't kill the innovation associated with blockchain. And there's new dynamics that are different than the old form of, the old way of capital formation. And that has to be taken into consideration. I know that everything's being driven by the Howey test right now, but I think that needs to be looked at again, because this is about developing token economies, not just raising money. And from my vantage point, I really see the tokens contributing to the movement of software more towards a utility basis. And these are microtransactions that have to be facilitated in some way. And in a decentralized way, everybody has to participate and be compensated for those resource utilizations. So the tokens are a great way to do that. So I think that these regulators have to be able to see this in a different light, so that we get the right legislation if it comes.
Yeah, I think I really think it's really commendable that our legislation is really on the forefront of this topic. So I really commend that. In terms of questions, or what I would suggest is, let's see if we can make it simpler for money transfer regulations. That's an important aspect that was brought up earlier today. And then I think also the other one is STOs, security tokens. Can we try to make this a little more streamlined for startups who are trying to do the right thing and are trying to tokenize assets, because that creates liquidity, that creates a lot of opens doors to a lot of new opportunities that don't currently exist.
Great, then we're out of time. So do you want a question for the audience? Rui, go ahead. Rui had a great question for the audience.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to read through your paper here. When do you plan to address security? So I'm going to give you guys options here. Not at all, once the product launches, or when you get a security breach. So number one, not at all. Raise your hand. All right, good.
No one will admit that.
So
it's in public.
We'll let them discuss on their own.
Yeah, exactly.
We got to go. We got a tight ship here.
All right, let me finish up really quick.
All
Though.
right.
Once the product launches, hands up. All right, almost. When you get a security breach, anybody?
All right, everybody, let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks so much. Thanks for a fun
Thank you very
panel.
much.